Greetings and thank you for joining us. My name is James Reford and you're listening to Books About Food, the podcast. Mac and cheese. To many of us, this is the ultimate comfort food. Some of us might have a favorite recipe, while others might connect this dish to a time and a place or perhaps a person who made it for them. Or dare I say it, there could be that box in the supermarket that one tends to gravitate towards. Beyond all that, what do we really know about this omnipresent dish? Karima Moyer-Nocchi is a professor at the University of Siena and has written The Epic History of Macaroni and Cheese. And to be sure, it is an epic history. She's kind enough to join us from sunny Tuscany to talk with us about her new book. Liz, I appreciate you joining us. I'm curious, let's start at the beginning. What drew me in was the title because, and I mean this with all due respect, you don't really associate mac and cheese with the word epic, which I thought was a terrific title.
Exactly, yes. So it's surprising because it seems like something that's light in the LITE sense, whereas it's actually been embroiled in history and can be traced back to the to ancient Rome. So that's where I begin. But what fascinated me about it was how it interweaved then with so many issues in history that were very decisive about where we were moving socially and politically, economically, and just the how macaroni and cheese and the dish followed that along up through becoming then an American culinary icon.
Where did the idea come from to do a book? Because sort of what we touched on is that mac and cheese has always sort of been there. Where was your light bulb moment that this could be something worthy of a book?
Well, it had started as a COVID project, something because Italy was the first country to go into lockdown over COVID, and from one weekend to where we were told on a Friday, I teach at the University of Siena. We were told on a Friday that on the next following Monday, we would be teaching from home. And we all sort of went into shock, students included, who were very angry about being home with their parents. And we went through a very miserable semester together. And I needed something to kind of bring me out of that, distract me, capture my interest. And I created this course, which was the Italian origins of macaroni and cheese. I did this as an online course, and then, unbeknownst to me, the librarian at Monticello, and we all know that Monticello is very important for their supposed history with macaroni and cheese involving Thomas Jefferson and his enslaved chef, James Hemings. So I ended up getting invited there, but they wanted me to expand the conversation. And in my presentation, I had brought the topic in through France and England and then France, actually, and slightly over to the colonies, and they wanted me to expand that. And as I did that over the course of a year before I actually went and did the presentation, I discovered really how involved in history the dish was, its passage with triangular trade and the slave trade, the change of ingredients, and the story that there was to tell behind all of that.
Well, I think you alluded to a question I had planned for further down is where did this take you and what surprises did it show you?
Uh, Many surprises along the way. One important one, I think. Let's see of where it took me. As again. The dish moves into England relatively early. So already in 1390, we find a recipe for macaroni and cheese in an English cookbook. The dish was at that time a an elite dish. So it had been on the papal table very much part of um, the aristocracy and the elite, the high clergy, and that's how it moved along. So a dish needs to be aspirational to have some sort of meaning in order for it to move on and then persist. So it attained that meaning, and then the meaning continued to change, and people, for example, in France began to identify it as well. When France took over the center of culinary culture, so they became the arbiters of taste, and that's happening in the 17th century. They slowly were taking macaroni, which was originally an Italian dish, into their inner sanctum of what was going to represent elite French cooking. The English then, who already had macaroni and cheese, were then imitating that. Um, the dish would then travel over to the colonies, so it's really moving around quite a lot. So, but one of the things that you said to me was what was something that was surprising, is to find that it also went to the Caribbean. Now, in the Caribbean, it would go on to become and is today the national dish of Barbados. In the Caribbean islands, you will find macaroni and cheese throughout. And that's very much about the history of triangular trade, Europe, Africa, the Americas, and how those ingredients traveled around. Um, the Caribbean was a way station for the African slave trade. Slaves would be what was called broken there, and then transferred up to North America, to the North American colonies, or into North America when it became the early United States. So what you've got there then is the transfer of ingredients. Now it's interesting to find then in all of this going around and mixing around is that the first recipe for macaroni and cheese with cayenne pepper, which is coming from that triangular trade, is going to appear in Scotland in a recipe in 1795, very early, a recipe for a pie. So it's a macaroni pie in Scotland with cayenne pepper. Okay. And then, meanwhile, going back to Barbados, they have a thing called macaroni pie, which is crustless, but it's called pie because it's relatively solid, baked in a dish. You cut it into these sort of squares, and they call that just pie. So it's so ubiquitous there that it's just called pie. So those are the kinds of things that really fascinate me about culinary history, about this dish, where it's been, where it goes, and who absorbs it into their culinary identity.
Very intriguing about its link to the Caribbean. I guess we have to thank the Columbian Exchange for that. And it's curious as to its connection to Scotland with cayenne pepper, because Scottish food is not known to be overly spicy, and particularly being the national dish of Barbados, I think you said.
The national dish of Barbados, it's also very well known in Trinidad and the Bahamas. So throughout the Caribbean, it's an important dish. But macaroni pie is also part of the culinary landscape. So not necessarily at the level of haggis, for example, in Scotland, but it is considered one of their national dishes. Along with you've got your Scotch pie, macaroni pie, and other Scottish dishes.
Yes. And I have not tried it, but I have seen deep fried macaroni and cheese in Scotland available.
Okay, yeah, yeah. It's very important there. Yes.
Well, curious about the Caribbean. When it did the transferred over there, was it still a dish for the elite, or was that coming down to the more the grass to the slaves, or was that food for slaves or the common, or was that still an elitist dish?
It would remain an elitist dish until the middle of the 19th century. So when it gradually would start to change. But it remained so because of what was going on in culinary fashion in England and France. England and France were the point of reference for the colonists. They were in a diaspora like anyone else, always looking over to England and France for their fashion cues, their culinary cues, social cues, how to behave, and as far as the table goes, what to cook, how to prepare it, and how to serve it, and how to act while you're eating it. Very much dictated. So while Americans were becoming Americans, that fashion was still dictated by very much by England and France. That same thing is going to happen in the Caribbean, where they're trying to create a verisimilitude of what they feel like colonial elites should be wearing and acting, and how they should be acting, and what they should be eating. It remains an expensive dish because that macaroni is being imported. It's an imported food item, and that keeps it expensive and very much part of ostentatious display.
No, well, certainly the all the governors and the people who ran the place wanted to make just bring English society over. So certainly
Yeah.
it does make
So
sense.
example, the governor of the Bahamas after Lord Dunmore, who was Scottish, he was the last royal governor of Virginia. During the American Revolutionary War, he goes back to England, but then he becomes the governor of the Bahamas. So you've still got that same kind of trade going on. And again, then you end up with a Scottish macaroni pie with cayenne pepper. Cayenne, I believe it's called, yeah.
Maybe I should,
Oh,
of
and wait, we had one little extra thing.
course.
Just the name of the pepper, the habanero pepper, as we know, habanero, the Scotch bonnet, which is the shape of a what's called a tam o'shanter, which is a Scottish kind of hat. All of that kind of thing going on. Okay, so yes.
Well, that's the beauty of culinary history, the connections and the how everything is interwoven without
Mhm.
even people realizing it.
Absolutely. I love the expression coined by a friend of mine, history was written as if no one ever ate, which gives culinary historians lots of ground to be producing books like this. So that because it's a relatively new field, we're not yet hair splitting in the way that other scientific fields are.
I was curious about the governor of Virginia who brought over the macaroni and cheese to the Caribbean. Did he have any connection with Jefferson? Did he learn about the dish through Jefferson or meeting Jefferson by
Well,
any way?
okay. So when he was the royal governor, I dedicate an entire chapter to a Jefferson. I had ended up having a fellowship at Monticello, so that I could closely examine and deconstruct the mythology, the history, the gastromyth of Thomas Jefferson, and how that was transferred on then to James Hemings, his enslaved chef, and how that whole story got started. Because macaroni and cheese was already, and I cover this thoroughly in my book, it was already in the colonies before Jefferson had even left for Paris. There is evidence that Jefferson himself would have eaten it at a favorite tavern that he went to, which was owned by an Italian man who would have been creating the dishes from England and France that were on the proper elite table. So there was that. Also, that particular governor of Virginia, James Murray, the fourth Earl of Dunmore, while he was there in 1773, he had ordered a shipment of macaroni and a good amount of Cheshire and Gloucester cheese to Virginia. There are newspapers that abound with orders for macaroni and cheese already in the 1770s coming over to the colonies. And I talk about the important thing aspect there is a thing called macaroni fashion, which is a longer conversation. But macaroni and cheese was known, it was legible, there were culturally legible, is what I mean. And by the 1770s, it was already being imported, and I realized that people don't always follow Jefferson and his movements. He returned from Paris in 1789. So it was a done deal by
Oh,
that
okay.
point. Yeah, yeah.
Well, maybe I should backtrack a little, maybe. When you started this project, did you have a definition of macaroni and cheese that you wanted to work within, or did that expand in any way?
Well, it it defines itself really early on. So, in the Middle Ages, macaroni was an umbrella term, and it was all of the shapes except vermicelli, vermicelli and ravioli, which is a stuffed pasta. There weren't a whole lot of other shapes. So we're basically talking about the gnocchi shape, noodle shapes, a lasagna, a proto lasagna shape, which is about a sheet of dough about the size of the palm of your hand. So you've got that size, and also handmade macaroni, which is going to be hollow. You take a piece of dough, roll it up onto a metal rod, remove the rod, and there you've got macaroni. But again, this is not something that is associated with rustics or la cucina povera, as it's called, the poor cuisine. When you're talking about rolling up on a metal rod, every single bite that is going into someone's mouth, this is a very laborious dish. And that shape was very curious as well. First of all, it's going to hold a sauce very nicely, it goes inside, and then the mouth feel of it. The curiosity of having this little piece of dough that's been rolled out and is hollow. So there's a lot going on there of why that piece would end up being called of macaroni. And the other pieces like the gnocchi, they would go their own way. Noodles would go their own way, be tagliatelle, etc. But for a very long time, all of it was called macaroni. But the thing is that you're not talking about just calling another word for pasta, because the only way of making pasta was with cheese. There weren't a lot of sauces. You didn't have your tomato and all of that for a very long time, up until the 19th century. So the way to make pasta, and which was called macaroni, was with cheese in some sort of way.
People, including myself, forget that the tomato was not indigenous or historically connected for such a great length of time to Italian food.
Yeah. So the tomato goes over to arrives in Italy, 1544, and does not enter into the culinary grammar. It doesn't make sense in what they're eating and how they're eating. It doesn't make sense for filling the stomach of the poor. It's not really a fruit. It's not really a vegetable. What is this thing? It doesn't have a place for a very long time, and is basically ignored for a good amount of time until we get up to the 19th century.
Right. I think people were afraid of it originally. I think it was something to do
Well,
with the nightshade
there's a story
family.
that it's part of the nightshade family, etc. Right? Yeah.
So you have macaroni and cheese sitting on these grand tables. How and roughly when would did the transition take place?
So the transition is going to take place while a lot of other things that are layered are going on in this at the same time. So, socially and politically, what's going on is that you've got what's called the springtime of the peoples. And there's a lot of social division. There's a great exodus from a lot of rioting in Europe, a great exodus into the United States then from Europe. Um, a lot of talk about social reform. But importantly, it's the middle classes, a growing middle class that is talking about social reform for the lower classes because they really didn't have anyone in power who was speaking for them. So while that's going on, innovations in industry are happening as well. You've got the hydraulic press coming in and other ways of manufacturing pasta. In addition to that, you've got the discovery, I'm putting that in air quotes because it had the idea of it had happened earlier, of gluten. Now, gluten, unlike what the way people think of it today, where it's really it's got such bad connotations around it, and gluten, everyone wants to be gluten free. Well, it was completely the opposite. Gluten was the miracle food. Gluten was the plant version of meat. And this is the way that we're going to bring about social reform and start finding a way to get some nutritious food to the lower classes. So we've got industry that's picking up. We've got medicine that's telling us gluten is going to, it was called flesh forming. So you have flesh forming gluten. Um, and it was inexpensive. It was becoming more inexpensive and easier to transport as well because transport systems were also changing. So much is going on in the 19th century that's going to bring that food to then to make it more widespread. But the allure had already been established. And so that's what's also going to, it's not like you're asking people to suddenly eat acorns because you found out that they're good for them. Acorns are not going to have an allure, whereas as macaroni and cheese always had had an allure. It had always been on the elite table. And so reformers like, if you're familiar with Juliet Corson, a 1877, she and others, Sarah Tyson, become evangelists sort of for getting more macaroni to the people. So it becomes pasta for the people at that point. She, in 1877, writes a cookbook during the Great Railroad Strike called 15-cent Dinners for Working Men's Families. And she's very much an advocate for macaroni in 1877.
I just love the idea of the term flesh forming. I don't know if that would be a
Yeah,
big
yeah.
seller these days.
Yeah, that was flesh forming, but also when we get into processed cheese, a part of the sell of processed cheese was not only that it was shelf stable, you didn't need refrigeration, it was made in a factory, and so it was much purer, supposedly, than other cheeses. But it too was going to get the approval of the American Medical Association and be called flesh forming. So when you get that cheese on top of that flesh forming cheese on top of the flesh forming pasta, then you've got something that's also really important for children. It's going in so many different directions.
It's fascinating how just, we think of mac and cheese just being mac and cheese. We don't,
Well,
and it's just
I don't, but
fascinating to,
yeah. If I can add another
of course.
dimension to that earlier on is that let's say before the Protestant Reformation, things like that, when that starts in. But when the calendar was very full, the Christian dietary calendar was very full with days that were meatless. Macaroni and cheese was a way that that sort of abstinence fatigue that people felt because it was considered a time of mortification of the flesh. You were supposed to suffer. Um, but people don't like suffering. So they're going to do without their meat. But then let's get something else in there to substitute for that that's going to be sumptuous and comforting. And macaroni and cheese in that way also attached to religion is going to be brought forward through time.
Just bringing some of that flesh-forming macaroni and cheese to atone. So,
Right. So you've got mortification of the flesh and flesh forming as well, right? So,
um, I may have asked this, but we may have touched on it. But when you started this project, did you have a time frame in mind about roughly what you're going to study, or did that expand in any particular direction that the
well,
history went on?
as I said, when I started off with the project, what I found interesting is that now I live in Italy. I've lived here for 35 years. This is my home. You can hear from the way that I speak that I was raised and educated in the U.S. Um, so what I found interesting was that Americans would say, "Oh, I didn't realize that was Italian." That there was an Italian origin to it. And that's why I originally wanted to put that course together because of the Italian origin of the dish. And then looking at France and England, here I am in Europe. Um, then I went through Monticello and expanded and expanded. Then when I wrote up the proposal to turn that into a book, I decided that I would draw it through all the way to modern America and then just end in present time so that it would truly be an epic history. I start in 160 BCE and then end up in the US.
And here we are.
Yeah.
What's next for you, if I can ask?
So right now, the book just came out in February 3rd, and I'm just focusing on right now doing presentations, and I'm open to invitations for presentations. And I want to mostly focus on just getting the book launched this year. I'd also like to start a newsletter. I know that everyone's either doing a newsletter or a podcast these days, but something macaroni oriented because I have a whole bibliography of things that I didn't put in the book. So it was definitely not scratching and clawing and trying to find things that I could piece this thing together. If anything, it was what am I going to leave out? Because there are so many interesting aspects to this, and and then I've been involved in I've been asked to participate in a cookbook, which is something else that someone else is doing. So that would be something for fun after an epic history. Being involved with a cookbook sounds something light,
No,
frankly.
I'm sure. Thank you for your time. It's been a wonderful chat. Best of luck and
Thank you. You too.
cheers. Once again, many thanks to Karima Moyer-Nocchi for taking the time to talk with us. And thanks to you as well for tuning in and listening. Drop us a line if you have any suggestions about authors and subjects you'd like us to delve into. So until the next time, I'm James Rieford. This is Books About Food, the podcast. Take care.